Okay, this week, week 9, and next week 10, we're going to be looking at ethics. So I'm going to present the entire lecture this week, and I'll put it in Blackboard, and then you'll be referring back to it next week as we go through and do more practice with it. So this week will be the introduction of the material, a little bit of smaller application, and then next week your lecture questions are going to be practical. Apply this theory to this problem, etc. So we need to talk about ethics. What are ethics? What is ethical theory? So let's move into it. So first of all, ethics is actually a branch of philosophy. And so we're going to be looking at philosophical questions this week and next week. Again, this is part of the humanities. We've talked about before that humanities is art, music, literature, but also philosophy, history. We've looked at art specifically, we've looked at some literature, now we're going to look at the philosophy. When we go into philosophy, there are different branches of it. One is called ontology, and that is bringing about the question of being. What is it to be? What is your existence? Why? So those are the questions they're thinking of. Epistemology looks at truth. What does it mean when we say something is true? And aesthetics, most people know this, although you don't think of it as philosophy, but it's looking at how do we define beauty? How do we define something that's pleasing to the eye? And ethics is the look at why and what is good, what is morally correct. So we're going to be looking at how to build up an ethical argument in this section. So when we talk about philosophy, there are two things that come into place. One, we have universal principles that they can look at, such as death. That's something that applies to everyone. Or matters of fundamental importance. So could be controversial issues of the day, abortion, death penalty, gay marriage, etc. And so there's two different ways that you can go about looking at these things. And we're going to talk about both of these. And so when we go in and you're thinking philosophically, then there's a couple of things that come into play. One is things to avoid. So when you're looking at an argument, philosophers try and avoid dogmatism and relativism. So in the classroom, I ask students, what comes to your mind when you hear the word dogma? So what still comes to mind is religion. And that's really the place where we see a lot of dogma, because it's a viewpoint or a system of beliefs based on insufficiently examined premises. So just to use an example, in Catholicism, they believe in the Immaculate Conception. And the Immaculate Conception, when Mary was in the womb of her mother. It doesn't have to do with Jesus with the Immaculate Conception. The Immaculate Conception means that Mary was born free of sin so that she could then be the vessel for Jesus. Because the Old Testament tells us everyone has this taint of original sin. So God, in his earthly form, wouldn't want to be born into someone who is sinful. And so it just made sense for the church to say, well, then Mary must not have been born with sin, so she was immaculately conceived without sin. The problem is, you just accept it. If you grow up Catholic, you just accept that. You don't question it. You don't really start to think through, well, what really is sin? What does it mean that we're really born with sin? Is it something tangible that we can look at or talk about? Were there other ways that Jesus could have been born to Mary without her being free of sin? So there's lots of questions that get tied up into that, but we generally don't ever think about that. So that creates a problem, though, because that means you're automatically coming to the argument with a biased viewpoint. If you just accept all the things that you're told to accept without questioning them, then you're going to have prejudices and biases that you need to get rid of first. And just the idea of this and the idea of philosophy is simply to question everything. It doesn't mean that when you question the Immaculate Conception, you're going to suddenly not, you're going to become atheist. No. In fact, a lot of Catholic priests will tell you to question your faith, question your beliefs, because they come from this philosophical bent. But you always need to question it, and in questioning it, it makes you stronger, often in your faith. Some people then may come to the opposite conclusion and say, well, this just doesn't really all make sense, so I can't accept it. And so that's why we do have atheists. But you do have believers, and a lot, well, I don't know, a lot's a prejudiced term to begin with, but I would say many Christians are of the conservative bent, where they buy into dogma unconditionally. If the pastor says it, if the church says it, it's true. I don't need to think any more about it. But then there's middle of the road Christians who do sit and question everything. They think about, well, why is this important that the pastor or priest is telling me this? Why do I need to believe this? And when they question it, they still come to the conclusion that, well, it's a good decision what this priest said, what this pastor said, or what this rabbi said, whatever religion you want to look at. But as long as you're questioning it, then you can either become stronger in your faith, or you can let the doubts subside or grow stronger. But in any event, you're going to confront them and come to a conclusion without the prejudice and the blinders on. And that's all philosophy wants you to do, is try and shed your biases for just this issue, look at the pros and cons, think about them, and whatever decision you come to is wonderful, as long as you come to it through questioning and examining your ideas.